Like a silver streak across the midnight sky, our stories move with a brilliance and speed you will never forget. Experience high-octane drama and the thrill of a narrative that never slows down for anything. Click subscribe now and catch the streak before it disappears into the dark.
The call came through at 3:47 in the afternoon. I know the exact time because I was in the middle of entering a formula into a spreadsheet when my coworker Daphne knocked on my cubicle wall and said, "Hey, are you okay? You just went completely white." I hadn't even realized I'd answered my phone. I was still holding it against my ear, not moving, listening to the paramedic explain that I'd collapsed near the elevator on the fourth floor of my office building, that my coworkers had called 911, that I was currently being stabilized, and that they needed an emergency contact to come to St. Augustine Medical Center right away. Except I hadn't collapsed yet when he said this. I was still sitting at my desk, which meant the person he was calling about was me, past tense, and I was somehow both the patient and the person as receiving this call because the paramedic had dialed the wrong number on my phone. He'd meant to call my emergency contact. He'd called my mother instead. I heard her voice in the background, small and tinny through the phone speaker. "Which hospital did you say?" And then, hold on, let me ask my husband. I should back up. My name is Elspeth. I'm 31 years old. I'm an accountant for a mid-sized logistics firm in Columbus, Ohio. I have a husband named Conrad, who I've been married to for 4 years, a 7-year-old daughter named Winnie, who thinks spaghetti is a personality, and a family of origin that I spent most of my adult life trying very hard to love correctly. My parents are Gerald and Fern. My younger brother is Colby, who is 26 and has never held a job for longer than 8 months because, according to my mother, he's still figuring things out. My parents own a small house 40 minutes from mine. My brother lives with them. He has lived with them, on and off, for his entire adult life, and the off periods are when he's staying with a girlfriend, which never lasts because, according to my mother, the women he dates are never quite right for him. I am the one in the family who figured things out. I put myself through the last 2 years of college after my parents ran out of money. I passed my CPA exam on the first try. I got a good job. I married a good man. I made a stable life. And I paid for things. I don't say that with bitterness. I say it as a fact, the same way I would note a line item on a balance sheet. Over the past 6 years, I had paid my parents' car insurance twice when they fell behind. I had covered 3 months of their mortgage after my father's knee surgery. I had loaned, and I use that word loosely, my brother $2,200 for a security deposit on an apartment he moved out of 4 months later, taking the security deposit dispute with him and leaving me with nothing. I had bought my mother a new laptop when hers died, helped pay for my brother's car repair, and sent birthday and Christmas money every single year without fail. Conrad never said, "Don't do it." He asked me once, about 2 years into our marriage, sitting at our kitchen table while I was writing out a check to my parents, "Do you want to keep doing this?" I said yes. I thought I did. I thought that was what family meant. So when the paramedic accidentally called my mother, instead of Conrad, at 3:47 on a Tuesday afternoon in October, my mother heard the words, "Your daughter has collapsed at work. Possible cardiac episode. We need someone to come to the hospital." And she asked my father what they should do. I know this because I was still on the phone. The paramedic hadn't realized he'd dialed wrong yet, and I was frozen at my desk listening to my parents have a conversation about me. Like I wasn't there. My father said, "What about Colby?" My mother said, "He just woke up. I don't want to deal with him right now." And then my father said, "Is it serious? Like, is she? You know?" And my mother said, "They said possible cardiac episode. She's probably fine. She's young." You know how dramatic those paramedics can be. I hung up the phone. I sat there for 30 seconds. Daphne was still standing in the door of my cubicle. She had a look on her face that I didn't fully understand until much later, which was the look of someone watching a person absorb something awful in real time. Then the dizziness hit. Actual dizziness, not metaphorical. The room tipped sideways, a sharp pain bloomed behind my left eye, and the last thing I remember is Daphne saying my name very loudly. I woke up in the hospital. Conrad was sitting beside my bed. He had Winnie's purple crayon stuck behind his ear, which meant he'd come straight from picking her up from school. His jacket was inside out. He was holding my hand with both of his. "Hey," he said. "Hey, there you are," I said. "How long have you been here?" he said. "About 40 minutes. You scared me half to death." I found out later what had happened in those 40 minutes. The paramedic, once he realized he'd dialed the wrong contact, called Conrad immediately. Conrad had Winnie at his mother's within 15 minutes and was at the hospital 20 minutes after that. He had spoken to my doctors, signed the consent forms, and been briefed on everything by the time I opened my eyes. He had also tried, 3 times, to reach my parents. 4:02 p.m. Conrad called my father. No answer. 4:19 p.m. Conrad called my mother. She picked up, told him she was in the middle of something and would call back. 4:38 p.m. Conrad called my father again. My father said they were on their way, that it would probably be an hour or so. My parents arrived at 6:11 p.m., 2 hours and 24 minutes after the hospital called them. 2 hours and 24 minutes in which I was unconscious, then groggy, then increasingly aware that the 2 people who were supposed to come when something was wrong were nowhere in the building. My mother walked in, carrying a Panera bag. She had brought soup. "We stopped on the way," she said, by way of explanation. "You know how hospital food is." I looked at Conrad. He looked at me. Something passed between us that I don't have a word for yet. My father patted my foot through the blanket and said, "You gave us quite a scare." I said, "What were you doing?" My mother set the soup on the tray table. "Your brother had a situation." "What kind of situation?" She paused. She and my father exchanged a quick look, the kind parents do when they're calibrating how much to tell you. "His car got towed," my father said. I repeated this back to them. "His car got towed. It's more complicated than that," my mother said. "He parked in a no parking zone, apparently for several days, and there was a fine involved. And you know how he gets when he's overwhelmed. He really needed us there." The fine, I later found out, was $290. Colby's car had been parked illegally for 4 days outside a bar he liked to go to, accumulating tickets until the city finally towed it. The total he owed, tickets plus towing fee, was $290. My parents spent 2.5 hours helping my brother deal with a $290 parking situation, while their daughter was unconscious in a hospital 40 minutes away. I didn't say anything else that night. Conrad held my hand. My parents ate their Panera and watched TV in my room. My mother cried a little when the doctor came in to explain what had happened. A vasovagal syncope episode, triggered by dehydration and stress. More frightening than dangerous, but worth monitoring. And I watched her cry and felt something very cold and very clear settle into my chest. The doctor said I'd need to reduce stress, improve sleep. Come back in 2 weeks for a follow-up. He did not say, figure out why the people who are supposed to show up for you don't. That part I had to figure out myself. I was discharged the next morning. Conrad took the week off work. His mother, Georgette, came to stay with us for 3 days and cooked dinner every night and watched Winnie after school so I could rest. My mother called once to check in. My brother texted me a gif of a cartoon heart with the word "feel better" written inside it. 2 weeks later, my mother called to ask if I could send $400 that month instead of the usual amount. I held the phone away from my face and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. "Why?" I asked. "The towing thing set us back," she said. "Your father and I covered most of Colby's fine. You covered his fine. He doesn't have the money, Elspeth." "Mom," I said. "I was in the hospital." "I know, honey. We were so worried." "Were you?" I said. There was a pause. What does that mean? I know what time you got there, Conrad told me. I know about the 3 calls he made. I know you were getting soup from Panera while I was unconscious. We were hungry, she said with a slight edge in her voice now. We hadn't eaten. We came as soon as we could. 2 hours and 24 minutes, I said. After the hospital called you. Colby needed us. I needed you. Another pause. You had Conrad, I said then. Maybe Conrad is my family. I hung up. My hands weren't shaking, which surprised me. I expected to feel something dramatic, guilt, maybe, or grief. Instead, I felt like I had just closed a spreadsheet I'd been staring at for too long. The numbers were finally adding up. I talked to Conrad that night after Winnie went to bed. We sat on the back porch with decaf coffee. I was off caffeine per doctor's orders, and I told him what I was thinking. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love most about him. When I was done, he set down his mug and said, "You know I've been waiting for this conversation for 3 years." "I know," I said. "What do you want to do?" I said. "I want to stop," he asked. "All of it?" I said. "All of it." He picked up his mug. He looked out at the yard. "Okay," he said, "I'm with you." My parents' wedding anniversary is in November. Every year, the extended family gathers at my Aunt Rosemary's house. She's my father's sister, for a dinner in their honor. It's been a tradition since before I was born. It used to be meaningful. When I was small, I thought it was the most romantic thing in the world, that a whole family would come together every year just to see 2 people loving each other. This year's dinner was 3 weeks after my hospital stay. I thought about skipping. Conrad thought I should skip, but I'd been doing a lot of thinking, and I'd arrived at a decision that I want to be clear about. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about humiliating anyone. This was about saying, clearly and calmly and with everyone present, what was true. My parents have always been praised in our family for their sacrifice. They worked hard when we were young, and they did sacrifice things for us, and I don't erase that. But somewhere along the way, the story became fixed. Parents who gave everything, children who owe them everything in return. And the way that story gets told, the way my aunts and uncles and cousins nod and smile while my parents talk about how hard they worked, started to feel like a room I couldn't breathe in anymore. I wanted to open a window. The dinner was on a Saturday. My mother had made her roast chicken. Aunt Rosemary had baked a lemon cake. There were 18 people around, 2 tables pushed together in Rosemary's dining room, and at some point after the main course, my Uncle Pete raised his glass and said what he always says, "To Gerald and Fern. 35 years and still going strong. The backbone of this family." Everyone raised their glasses. I kept mine on the table. My mother noticed. She looked at me with a small, uncertain smile. I said, "I have something I want to say." The room got quiet in that particular way that rooms get quiet when someone says something unexpected at a dinner table. I said, "I love both of you. I want to say that first." My mother's smile steadied a little. "But I need to tell the family something. Because this story that we tell every year about what FIFI means, about who shows up, I think some pieces are missing." My father set down his fork. "Elspeth, on October 14th, I said, I collapsed at work. The paramedics called Mom at 3:47 p.m. Conrad called Dad at 4:02 p.m. He called Mom at 4:19 p.m. He called Dad again at 4:38 p.m. My parents arrived at the hospital at 6:11 p.m. The room was very still. Conrad got there in under an hour, I said. From the school pickup line, with Winnie in the car. I didn't look at my parents while I said the next part. I looked at my Aunt Rosemary because she was the one person in the room I trusted most. They were helping my brother with his car. It had been towed. The fine was $290. They have also, over the past 6 years, received approximately $14,000 from me in various forms of financial support. I don't say that to be cruel. I say it because I've decided I'm not going to keep doing it. I'm not going to send money anymore. I'm not going to cover things anymore. And I thought it was important to say it here. in front of everyone instead of just quietly disappearing. My brother made a sound that wasn't quite a word. My mother said, "This is not the place." I said, "I know, I'm sorry for that. But every time I've tried to have this conversation privately, I've been told I'm being dramatic or ungrateful, so I'm saying it here where it can be heard." My father stood up. His chair scraped back loud against the floor. What happened next, I didn't expect. Aunt Rosemary put her hand on the table and said, very quietly, "Gerald, sit down." He looked at her. She looked at him. He sat. Rosemary said, "Elspeth, I didn't know any of this." I said, "I know. Is this true? About the hospital?" I said, "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Then she turned to my parents and she said, "That's not okay." 3 words. That's not okay. I had been waiting, I realized, to hear those 3 words for a very long time. Not from a therapist, not from Conrad, from someone inside the family who had always loved my parents, who had no reason to take my side, except that what I was saying was true. My mother started crying. My father looked at the tablecloth. My brother Colby picked up his phone and started scrolling through it, which is what he does when something is happening that he doesn't want to be part of. Dinner ended early. People made polite excuses and gathered their coats. Rosemary squeezed my arm on the way out and said, "Call me next week." Conrad drove us home, in silence. Winnie had fallen asleep in her booster seat. He carried her in while I stood in the driveway for a moment, looking up at the sky, which was clear and very cold, the way Ohio skies get in November. I felt something I didn't have a name for yet. The next morning, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. The message was 4 minutes long, and she cried through most of it, and she said a lot of things about how much she loved me, and how hard things had been, and how she didn't realize. She said she didn't realize. I listened to it twice. Then I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter. Conrad came downstairs and poured himself coffee. He looked at me. "How do you feel?" he asked. I thought about it for a real moment, not a polite one. "Like I can breathe," I said. He nodded. He handed me a decaf. We stood in the kitchen while Winnie ate her cereal at the table and told us very seriously about a dream she'd had about a talking umbrella. My parents and I have not spoken in 6 weeks. As of the time I'm writing this. I don't know if we will soon. Don't know exactly what reconciliation looks like, or if it requires me to go back to who I was before October 14th. The person who covered the gaps and asked for nothing, who measured love in how much she gave and how little she expected back. What I know is this: Conrad is on my emergency contact. He has been since the day we got married. I don't know why it took me so long to understand what that meant. That the person who runs red lights to get to you, not 2 hours later, not after stopping for soup, is the person you build your life around. The $290 towing fine has been paid. My brother is still figuring things out. I am 31 years old, and I have finally figured out what family means. It means showing up.